Hey guys, this is Max here, MaksWerks, for part 3 of our KTM Supermoto build. And right here behind me you can kind of see all the stuff that we're going to be installing. This video is probably going to get split up into at least 2 pieces because it's going to be pretty long. But just to kind of go over the stuff that's required to make this bike street legal. So I went ahead and picked up a Polysport headlight. It's going to have high and low beam, and basically it's going to put out just enough light to pass inspection. I picked up this taillight off eBay for about $12, $13. It's got integrated turn signals, which takes care of my turn signal requirement, and it's got a riding light, a brake light, and that also counts as the license plate holder and light. I got a couple of basic mirrors here. Basically just, nothing really special, just the standard eBay style, rear view mirror, and we're going to mount them not in the bar ends, but rather up on the bar itself. I got a Tusk universal horn. It's going to look like this, basically just make noise. I got a flasher relay to keep the LEDs in check. I got a 4-wire ignition, so on and off, so we can control the bike. Tusk slim controller. You got off, low beam, high beam. Then you also got your turn signals and your horn. And this is going to work with the Tusk performance parts, whatever off-road harness. And this thing is actually going to take care of all the wiring on the bike. So we're excited to see how that goes. Then I got a couple of these brake sensors. So I believe on the KTM it's the pitch is 1 instead of 0.125. They're all 10 millimeter, but so these should be KTM specific, and you can get them from Tusk as well. So we're going to mount a front and rear brake switch on the bike, and then as a bonus, it won't be in this video, but there'll be another video. I picked up one of these JD jetting kit to help, because I've never used one of these and everybody raves about them, so I'm going to try it on this carb and see how the bike feels. Before this, I already installed a new battery, so we're juiced up and ready to go. So let's get started. So here's the bike kind of stripped down. I just finished doing the JD jetting kit, so if you want to watch that video, it's going to be in a separate video and you guys can see it on my channel. But so I'm going to give the bike a second to cool down, but I got all the plastics off, which really wasn't that much. And we're going to basically just start draping all the wiring around the bike and figure out where what needs to go before we solidify everything. So the first thing we installed is the controls over here. So there's going to be control for the horn, the turn signals, and low beam, high beam, and off. And this wiring harness, basically this goes to the headlights, and this plugs straight into the Tusk harness that we got. So it should make everything pretty much plug and play. This just screws on with 2 screws back here, screw 1, screw 2. Nothing really complicated, just bolt it onto the bar and go. I chose to use the faceplate mounting screw right here to hold onto the horn. That way it's out of the way as you turn, and the wiring harness will be long enough to get to it. And it'll be covered up by the headlights, so it's not in the way of anything. Step 1 of the wiring harness is to connect this. This is going to be our battery jumper. This is pretty straightforward. You just disconnect the battery, stick these guys on here. And so here's kind of the wiring harness laid out on the bike. So there we are, we're plugged up. These long pink leads go to the rear brake switch, rear light, brake light, and then turn signals and ground for the turn signals. And then up here on the front of the harness, we have this red and blue connector that plugs into this guy, which is your flasher relay. Make sure that your LEDs flash. Let's see. This plug right here is going to actually plug directly into this. Right here, this 6-pronger goes like that into the main switch. And then these guys are for a combination of headlights and turn signals. These blue and orange and black right here, this is turn signals. This is horn. and these I believe are part of the headlight. One of the nice things about this kit is you can test the fat as you go. And these two red wires earlier that I was saying there's a male and a female, these are your ignition wires, if you will. Basically, as long as they're disconnected, the current from the battery won't flow. And so to test the fat, we're just going to jumper them together real quick. And I went ahead and hooked up the horn. So the only thing that's hooked up is the battery, the flasher circuit, and the horn. And boom, horn works. So the next step here is we got to install the brake switch. This guy right here. And this banjo bolt actually lives basically inside of here on this side. But before we can get to installing the banjo bolt, we got to remove the cover here and drain out all the fluid. And normally the least messy way of doing this generally is just this. So you take the cap off and then you just shove very gently a rag in there, because this stuff is super absorbent. And so, oops, we got a little bit of splash out, but basically we want to make sure that when we pull the bolt out, there's not going to be a crap ton of fluid that's going to come falling out of there. Alright, and now we're going to remove this right here, and this is a 14 millimeter. And remember, banjo bolt's going to have two crush washers, one on each side. So we want to make sure we get those off as well, because we're going to be putting on new ones. So there it goes, and there's a bunch of fluid that I tried to suction out but couldn't. So let's get that, and then clean off this surface real quick. And there's our new switch installed, and you can see we got both the aluminum crush washer right here and right here. And now you just want to tighten it down and then run this line down here to this red and blue connection will be our front turn signal, or sorry, our front brake. Now when you're down to the last kind of basically quarter, half turn, you want to make sure that this brake line itself, you have some movement. You want to make sure that it's right up against that stop right there, maybe just underneath it. There's a little ledge right in here that holds it in place. So you want to make sure, and you want to make sure this is tightened down tightly, because you want those crush washers to crush a little bit. And there we go. So now we got our front brake, and now obviously upon doing this you have to bleed the whole front brake mechanism again, and it's going to take a little bit of time because you have a huge air pocket in there. Now you can use a power bleeding tool, but quite frankly I just go through and keep pumping until it starts to firm up and I stop seeing air bubbles come out of the top here, and move the camera basically like so. You can see the air bubbles coming out as I'm pumping, and those, we got to get all the air out of the system. And once the brake starts firming up, I'll start opening up the bottom reservoir down there so that basically we can relieve air pressure that way and get a fluid only system. The rear brake gets done pretty much the same way. The only thing is the reservoir is right over here. So there's a small plastic cover piece you got to remove on the other side to get to the bolt, and I'll show you guys that in a second. But basically, pull off the cap. Pull up the little rubber seal. And by the way, we're doing this for the wiring, but it's always a good idea whenever you get a new bike to go through and flush and replace the brake fluid, because it's probably, I would say, the single most neglected thing I see on bikes. Chains and then brakes, which is weird because chains make you go and brakes make you stop, so you'd think that those two things would be fairly important in terms of maintenance for people, but they're not. And over here again, so here's where our switch is going to go. So again, this is a 14 millimeter. And quite in there. There is normally a black plastic piece that covers this area right here. It comes off with a number 5 hex head. There's a bolt right here, and then there's a screw right down here. But it's pretty self-explanatory to remove. So there we go. Not a whole lot of leakage out of this one. Again, you want to make sure that you remove both of these crush washers so you don't accidentally install an extra one. And there's still one on here, I believe, and I can't. Have to get a pick to get it off real quick, but we're going to install it, and here's the wires that go down here to the second one. Now, the trickiest part of this installation is once you get this in is keeping this distance as much as you can right here away from the exhaust pipe. So I actually ran the wiring along the brake line back to the reservoir. And since it looks like I'm going to be running most of the wiring harness on the left-hand side of the bike anyway, those connections are over there. So now, just like we bled the front brake, we got to bleed the rear brake, and it's going to be basically the same thing all over again. You pump it until the air bubbles are done, and then you basically bleed it all out. Next part is mirrors. Is it ideal to have them kind of doing the bug-eye thing? Not really, but it's, at the moment it's the best spot I could figure out to put them. I might convert them to actual bar-end mirrors later, or I might move them around or just take one of them off or something. But for now, that's just kind of how it is. So the first thing I did today was I went to the harness and replaced this old Busman style fuse carrier with a modern micro fuse carrier. And the reason I did this was because yesterday when I was messing around with stuff, first thing I did was I popped this fuse. And then I realized that only hardware stores really carry these anymore. Like in AutoZone and stuff, they don't even have them half the time. So I figured we'd do a more modern install and just basically picked up this guy for about $2 because I got plenty of these little micro fuses. So that's something I would recommend doing if your harness came with an old school fuse holder like that. Alright, so what we have right here is we have the brake set up right here. Like that. You guys hopefully can see all of this. So I had to extend the wires on the brake light so it'll reach from all the way in the back. But basically what you're seeing is this red wire is actually coming out of this brake switch. So this is the positive for the brake switch, which is going to the run light. Then we have right here, this jumper right here is actually plus 12 for the brake, and then this is just the universal ground. So this is going to be when the bike is on, this is on, and then if we come around to the other side and I hit the front brake, you can see the brake light is flashing. Same thing if we do the foot brake. So we know both of our switches work, and then these two guys right here are our turn signals, which will wire into these orange and blue wires. So next step is I'm going to get this taillight basically fixed in place. Then we'll take care of the wiring, and then we can move on to handling the ignition and the headlight. So here's kind of our installed taillight, and if I take a step back here, there it is, centered up underneath the bike. Probably could have done this install a little bit cleaner, but to be honest with you, I plan on going with a white later. So that's kind of how it's just mounted up. Stainless steel hardware, lock washers and such. Alright, so what we did right here was drill a little hole, zip tie, keep it stuck up underneath the seat, and then there's the hole where it comes through right here. And then here we're going to jump it into the harness. So there we go, we got everything wired up. Let's see. Rear brake works, hand brake works, turn signal 1 works, turn signal 2 works. So there we go, we got our taillight wired up. Let me bring you over here and let you see all that. So here's our taillight wiring, here's where it comes out. So this will basically sit right here and that'll seal up against water and stuff. And then this is the harness just dangling right here for right now, but we're going to clean it all up. Basically bind all these together and make sure all these wires and stuff are out of the way. And now we can move on to the headlight and the ignition wiring. So you guys can see as the project moves along, my workbench becomes more and more of a mess. But I found this pigtail from an old project, and we're going to use this to actually wire up the headlight with. So just the standard 3-prong plug, and then I got the other end of it over here from another project, and I'll be able to basically have a removable headlight. So here's a little explanation of what we're doing in terms of wiring. So this is the headlight switch up here, and basically this is the black wire. There's 3 wires, a black, a white, and a blue. This is low beam and high beam, and this is what's called a main. And it's black, which is deceptive, makes you think it's a ground, but it's really not. This is where power comes in, and all the switch does is it turns on either current to this wire, or current to this wire, or current to no wires. So we're going to jump this into the red wires on the main harness, and what I did on this side is I grounded it to the frame for the headlight, and then I created this 3-prong plug. And then on the back of the headlight here, we have the female version of the black 3-prong plug with ground, high, and low. So the ground's going to go straight to the frame, and the high and low is going to go to the switch. So this will allow me to remove the headlight anytime if I need to, and keeps all the wiring kind of clean. So now I'm going to have to jump this into the main power of the harness, and then we can move on to the last part, which is the ignition. I thought this might help you guys understand a little bit more about what's going on. So this is basically the logic diagram for the headlight switch. So the negatives mean that there's nothing connected, and the positives mean it's connected. So like we were just talking about, this is open, low beam, and high beam, and what the switch does on high beam, it connects the blue and the black wires. Low beam, it connects the white and the black wires, and on open, it keeps them all disconnected. And here's kind of a big diagram of what we did in terms of the overall wiring diagram. So here's the battery, ground goes to the frame, plus goes into the black of the switch. This is through the main harness. And then the switch, the white from the switch goes to the low beam, the blue from the switch goes to the high beam, and the ground from the headlight goes back to the frame. Alright, so now we're kind of working on the harness for the ignition. And so the ignition that I bought, and all this is linked in the blog post, but the ignition I bought, basically when you turn it off, it connects 2 wires. When you turn it on, it disconnects those 2 wires and connects 2 different wires. So for security, I want full basically access. So when I turn the key on, I wanted to turn on the lighting harness and the electric start. When the key in the ignition is off, the electric start doesn't work. And what I'm going to do is since the other 2 wires are connected when the ignition is off, I'm going to jumper that into the kill switch, so whenever the ignition is off, the bike is always in kill switch mode. And what I did was I had some extra old HID parts, so I used the pigtails from the HID, so that's where my harness turns on and off. And then over here my kill switch has a similar set of plugs. And if I show you the back of the ignition, here's the back of the ignition, and here it is. And there's basically my connections for my harness. So 2 of these are going to go to the harness, and then the other 2 are going to go to the E-start. And then I got to wire up these 2 guys to the kill switch, and that's what I'm going to do next. And then hopefully after that, we can basically begin buttoning everything up and closing everything down. So over here, since we're basically over here, the difference is on that side with the harness, we were basically splitting the connection. Here we're joining the connection. So each of these, I left these wires solid, basically tapped in 2 lines here. And then on this side over here, we also have a plug that matches. So whenever the ignition is off, this connection is always jumpered. Alright guys, here we are, we're all wired up. So this is kind of the pre-put back together walk around. So we got our tail light wiring, runs through the tail fender right here. We got our fuse right there. Jumpers to the battery, runs through the airbox, up the frame. Here's our little rat's nest of wires. Flasher relays in there. Then the other rat's nest of wires is nicely tucked back here behind this headlight. So here's what the bike looks like with that headlight. here's our ignition. If we turn the ignition on, we have high, low, horn. Our turn signals are working. There we go. Our kill switch is disengaged, and our motor cranks over. So now I'm going to basically put it back together and go for a spin. So as you can see, the bike is all back together, the garage is clean again. And now basically my wheels just came in, FedEx guy just dropped them off. And I just rode this thing around in basically dual sport mode. And it's just ridiculous. That giant 56-tooth rear sprocket is just nuts. I don't know who the hell was riding this thing and what they were doing on it, but it doesn't make any sense. So to pull off the front wheel, there's a 26mm nut right here that holds the axle in place, and you can just knock it out. You want to make sure you loosen all four of these. They're 10mm. I'm actually going to go ahead and pop the caliper off as well while I'm down here. Because we're going to have to put the spacer on the caliper to make sure that we can get the caliper onto a much larger rotor. So there we go. Take a look at our caliper. Pads look pretty decent, so I'm not going to stress that. We'll just set this aside for a minute. And at this point, you just kind of go around to the other side and pull out the axle and roll just like that. And you just roll the wheel out. And then I can set this axle aside. So this wheel in here, it's going to have these spacers. The guy sent me 03 through 06 spacers as well with the wheels. Or I could just use the stock spacers out of my wheels as well. So let me just roll this out of the way for a second. And he was also really nice and threw in a Supermoto front fenders. We're going to put that on real quick. Now that we got the wheel, we're going to have to disassemble this brake because this is the stock Brembo whatever caliper holder, and this is the unit we got to replace it with in order to clear this larger floating rotor. And so for that to happen, we have to disassemble the brake caliper, and generally the first part of that is removing these pads to get this all apart. Okay, in order to remove the pads, you have to take out the cotter pin that's in here. You have to pull this pin out. Then there's a second lock that sits right here, and you just pull it out with a pair of pliers, and then you can just push this pin out. And as you can see, the brake pads just drop out, which makes changing them really easy. So there you can see the inside of the brake caliper. There's the dampener clip, there's your two pistons, there's the backing plate. Okay, so now that you got the pads out, what you really want to do is apply pressure to this, and I've already popped it out to make it easy. Basically just apply pressure on this until it pops out. And these two guide pins we're going to have to transfer over. So this one comes out with what looks like maybe an 8 or probably a 10mm nut. And this one has a hex bit. So we're going to remove these two bronze caliper guides, as well as probably these rubber dust seals, and then we'll transfer them to the new bracket. So you can see I took the dust boot off and transferred it in here. It's just a little rubber piece. You twist it until it gets in there. This right here is actually an 11, and we're just going to blast it out. Just like that. Pops right out. And if you look at this in the exact same orientation, it's probably going to go right in here. And we're going to actually put a little bit of Loctite on it before we tighten it down. There you go. There's your bracket, and basically what's going to happen at this point is you're just going to want to slide that guide in there, this guide in here, just like it was in the previous design. Pop those rubber bits back on, and then you'll see that if I do that, for instance, you can see that it fits like that. Fits exactly on the brake rotor. And then you basically just tighten it down the same way you would the stock unit. And there you go. So we turn the wheel, we can see there's the brake caliper. Stock brakes on this new mount. And if we just spin the wheel, you can see the wheel spins freely. Yeah. So when you press at the caliper, there's a little bit of dead space. Let's try that again. Wheel spins freely and stops. So the backside is going to be a bit more of a nightmare because he's got this giant fucking sprocket back here. So I'm probably going to take some links out of this chain to make this work. But basically, first things first is we've got to remove the rear wheel, and that starts with loosening these adjusters. They're 13 millimeter. And then back this out, which is going to be 10 millimeter and slightly seized. You know, I really wish people would get in the habit of lubing stuff like this up. You really need to put a little bit of grease on these, and I will when I'm to that stage. But I gotta take this out, and then we gotta just pop the axle out. And I don't know what size. The front is a 26. The rear is a 27. So we'll take this cap off, pop this out. And on this kit, I don't believe you have to do anything with the rear brake. It should just mount right up. So on the list of things I need to replace, this is definitely going to be on there because you can actually see daylight through that. So there we go. Rear wheel is on. Right now I got the adjusters, I got the axle set as far back as it'll go. And the difference with that crazy sprocket is that there's basically an insane amount of chain. So I'm definitely going to have to trim that down some. But in terms of clearance, it fits pretty much like a glove. So next thing, I'm going to pop out some links. There's the main link. So I'm going to pop out some links and basically shorten the chain up some, and then see where we are and maybe go for a ride. Well guys, this pretty much concludes the Supermoto build. Unfortunately there's no immediate ride test because after cleaning the chain I found there was a damaged link. So I'm going to have to order a new chain. But we got everything done in one weekend, start to finish. And when you guys are watching this, it'll all be contracted, obviously. But I put in probably, I would say 10 hours, 10, 11 hours over 2 days to do all of this. And obviously it goes a little bit slower when you're filming. But let me give you a walk around of the bike, just to show you what we've completed. Starting at the front, we got the Polysport headlight. This is a UFO Supermoto front fender that I got for free with the wheels. So thank you to him. We got our Warp 9 wheels with brand new Continental tires on them. Got the front brake spacer right here for the larger 300 millimeter front disc. Our ignition system right here. Our mirrors, our lights, horn and turn signals. In the back, we also got a big old wheel with a Continental tire on it. We got our integrated tail light sitting back here. And of course, we added the wiring harness throughout. And when the chain goes on, this bike will actually be done. But that gives you guys kind of just a walk around view of my Supermoto. And obviously, there's going to be lots of riding and hooligan footage coming soon once I get it actually on the road. I'm waiting on my plates anyway. But I want to just thank you guys for watching, and if you like, subscribe to the channel. Also, take a look at www.MaksWerks.com. The blog post that goes along with this video will actually include links where I bought all the stuff, so that you can also take a look at that and see what's going to work for you and what's not. So thanks for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed these videos.